Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're continuing with our series of YouTube videos to help you play chess better. Today's video, I'd like to go over a Grandmaster game, and we're going to go over the first really great chess player, Paul Morphy. You can learn a lot from going over Paul Morphy's games. He was one of the first to really understand the relationship between development, getting your pieces out as fast as possible. In fact, sometimes sacking a pawn if your opponent wants to waste time doing that so you can get ahead in development. And we're going to use the book Morphy Move by Franco, published by Everyman Chess. And it's going to be Game 17, Morphy against Boden, played in London in 1858. So Morphy was white, Boden was black. So let's get going. Morphy played e4 like he usually did. And in those days, pretty much everybody played e5 for black. And in this game, Morphy decides to play the King's Gambit. Not that popular today. Black should take the pawn, which Boden does not. Boden plays the move bishop c5. So bishop c5, in some lines there's now become threats to take the pawn or take the knight and then play queen check. So white plays knight f3, which guards those squares. Black plays d6, and white plays c3, and the author states that Morphy rarely played any other move. Notice what Morphy's trying to do here. He's trying to play c3 and d4 to attack the bishop. A lot of my lower-rated students, when they get to these kind of positions where there's a bishop on c5, they just kind of automatically say knights belong on c3, and then the bishop becomes very strong. Morphy says, no, I like that c3 square for my pawn instead. My knight can always come out behind my pawns. And I'm going to use my pawns as a battering ram against that bishop. So that's the more aggressive, better way to play in a lot of these lines where black plays bishop c5. Okay, so after c3, Boden plays bishop to g4. And Stockfish says, yeah, that's about as good as any, even though it violates the principle, move every piece once before you move in. Sorry, it violates the principle knights before bishops. Okay, Morphy simply plays bishop e2. Stockfish suggests trading the pawns first. Black plays knight c6. And here white plays the interesting move b4. Stockfish says, it's all right, but it's probably not the best move. Black plays bishop to b6, of course, to save the bishop. And here, white has to decide what to play. Engine suggests a4. Morphy plays b5. And Boden plays the computer's #1 move, knight to a5. And now, the computer says black has a very slight advantage. Okay, Morphy plays d4 now. Black plays his best move. Plays bishop takes f3, giving up the bishop pair, which is okay in this position. White recaptures with the bishop. Black plays e takes d4. White plays c takes d4. Computer says Morphy could have played, castles or queen d3 as well. And now black plays queen f6, keeping an eye on both pawns. And Morphy plays the best move, bishop e3. Black plays his best move, knight c4. Morphy says, I'm going to sack the f4 pawn, which the engine agrees is the best move. It's interesting how here we are like 160 years later, and, Morphy is correctly sacking the pawn, and the computer is saying, yes, do that, and you have full compensation, but nothing more. So Morphy plays bishop f2. And here, Stockfish says he would throw in a check first. Bishop checks, king e2, with black being somewhat better. And the author, who's I'm sure using an engine also to annotate the game, mentions that bishop a5 check is the best. So Boden just takes the pawn. Queen takes f4, and Stockfish says, ooh, now white can just castle with big advantage. So Morphy does castle. And black plays knight f6. Stockfish says knight e7 would keep white's advantage to a lower level. And now the computer says after queen e2, that white is ahead by about 2.7 pawns. I guess the computer wants to blast open the center in that case. And I'm sure in the book, yeah, he gives queen a2, knight a5, e5. So let's just show that. Queen e2 hitting the knight, knight a5, e5. You're starting an attack with his king in the center. D takes e5, D takes e5. And now where's the knight going to go? If the knight goes back to, let's say, g8, bishop takes here, threatening bishop checks, winning the queen. And black's in big trouble. Okay, so back to the game. White didn't play queen e2. He played queen d3. And Stockfish says, oh, Morphy, you missed that one. All right, so white is better, but maybe only microscopically so in this position. He missed his big chance. Knight a5 to save the knight. White develops his knight with knight to c3. Stockfish suggests maybe bishop e3 first. And now it says black should try to get rid of that bishop pair with knight to g4. Black instead castles. And once again, white's lead starts to grow. Computer suggests knight e2. Morphy plays g3. Says go away queen in a different way. Queen goes back to h6. So let's look at the development right now. Both sides have brought out all their pieces except for their rooks. But the white rook on f1 is already on a semi-open file in very good shape. So he counts as being developed. The other three rooks, the white rook on a1, the black rook on a8, the black rook on f8 are not developed. So both sides have to figure out what they want to do with that. And of course, black is up a pawn here. So even though white's ahead in development and he has a better center, a pawn is a lot. So the computer says that the game is about even here. Okay, so Morphy plays king to g2 to keep an eye on the h3 square. And black says, I'm going to play rook on a to e8. Whenever your opponent does something like this and traps a rook on f8, or when you do that, it either means that he needs to guard f7 or he's planning to push that pawn. In this case, maybe he's thinking about guarding it because white has a semi-open file. And of course, if black wants to double his rooks on the semi-open file, it doesn't matter as much which rook went there first. Sometimes it does. Here it probably doesn't. In which case, the rook on f8 will be developed to e8 anyway. So black is taking a wait-and-see attitude, but right now that rook on f8 has no moves. Okay, so white plays rook a e1, and we can contrast white's rooks with black's, where the rook on e1 is forcing the rook on f1, to be blocked from the center like black's is, but black's rook has no semi-open file and really not much to do, while the white rook is excellent on f1 is excellently placed. So you can see the difference here. Having that extra pawn off the board gives him that semi-open file, and he gets pressure on that file enough only to get rough equality for his pawn, though. Giving up a pawn is a lot. Okay, so here the computer suggests queen to g6. Black plays king h8, possibly going along with the idea of pushing this pawn later, although I don't see why he would want to do that, but maybe that's why he did that. So white plays bishop e3, hitting the queen, kind of forcing the queen to go to the nice g6 square. And again, the game is about even. And here Morphy plays the computer's top move, knight to e2. Threatening knight f4 when you can see the combination of the knight and the bishops are taking away all the queen's squares. So black has to be very, very careful about not getting his queen trapped here. Whenever you see a position like this, you should smell the danger on your queen. You should look around and say, where's my queen going to go if he gets attacked by these pieces? And make sure there's a place. So here Stockfish suggests that black create the h7 square by playing h5. Black understands the idea, but he plays h6 instead, which is not as technically accurate. Okay, so it's white's turn here, and the engine wants white to play the natural knight f4, forcing the queen back. Morphy plays bishop to d2. And in the book, he gives that an exclamation point, possibly because he's offering this pawn. Stockfish says that black should now sack the exchange with rook takes e4 with close to equality. Okay, we wouldn't expect too many players to play a move like rook takes e4 here, especially at the time this game was played in 1858. So here, Boden plays d5, and that allows white to fork the queen and the d-pawn with knight f4. So that's pretty much a mistake. Morphy doesn't miss his chance. Knight f4, queen h7, and now taking the pawn would double and isolate the pawns, so Morphy instead expands with e5. Black says, oh good, I'm up a pawn, let's trade queens. Queen takes d3, knight takes d3. Yes, Morphy is down a pawn and they've traded queens, but black really doesn't have any great moves here to prevent a whole bunch of ideas for white. So the engine suggests knight e4. Black plays knight c4, counterattacking the bishop on d2. White says, okay, but now I can attack the rook and the knight with bishop to b4 and win the exchange. Black plays knight e4 now. Stockfish says white should just play bishop takes e4, d takes e4, rook takes e4. Morphy takes the exchange. The exchange in chess doesn't mean you're winning material on a trade. It means you're getting a rook for a bishop or a knight. I've tested dozens of players, if not hundreds, on that when I give them lessons because, it's been standard for, a long, long time in chess that winning the exchange means winning a rook for a bishop or a knight, and almost everybody that I test, a very high percentage say, oh, winning the exchange means coming out ahead in a trade. Well, that's sort of what it means in English, but it's not what it means in chess. In chess, it means you get a rook for a bishop or a knight. Doesn't mean you get a queen for a rook or a knight for a pawn. Those things are not winning the exchange. Those things are coming out ahead in a trade. Okay, rook takes f8. As we say, Morphy is now up the exchange. He could still take this pawn, which the computer suggests he should. Instead of taking that pawn, Morphy decides I'm already up enough material, and he plays knight f4, hitting the d-pawn. Black plays his best move, knight on e to d2, hitting the rook. Morphy says, if I give back the exchange here and take the pawns, I have a fantastic game. So he plays the best move, bishop d5. But knight f4 had thrown away a lot of his advantage. So instead of being up by about 2 pawns, he's only up by about 1. Knight takes f1. Morphy has to decide, does he want to play king takes f1, rook takes f1, or bishop takes c4 to get the piece back? When someone takes something, you need to take it back. But when you have these choices, you should take your time and make sure you're taking the right one. Morphy plays bishop takes c4. Black has to save the knight, knight d2, hitting the bishop. Morphy plays bishop d5, hitting the pawn on b7. And here Stockfish suggests black should counterattack the knight with g5. Instead, he plays bishop takes d4, falling into a trap. He probably expected white to now play bishop takes b7. Instead, Morphy plays the winning move, which is to play e6. Why is that the winning move? Well, white's threatening just to play e7 and then bishop takes f7, winning the rook. And black can't stop him by taking the pawn because on knight g6 check, he'll win the exchange for the last time and just completely win the game. So black is completely lost here. He really doesn't have any good moves. In the game, he played g5. White did play e7, hitting the rook. Rook went to e8. Morphy hits the rook with bishop takes f7. Black says, well, I'll get a knight out for my troubles. White says, I'm in no hurry to take the rook. He's not going anywhere. I'll just take the pawn. Whenever you have a position like this, again, take your time and figure out which move is better. Yes, they're both good for you, but one's probably a lot better than the other. The engine actually says that Morphy was wrong. That pawn takes pawn only wins the game, and bishop takes e8 is better, but it doesn't matter. He's winning. Black plays rook takes e7. Morphy takes back, and now these pawns are like target practice. So, for instance, suppose Black tries to save this pawn. Suppose he plays bishop to b6. White can start with a move like bishop g6. At any point, he's probably winning this pawn here. He could play rook checks and rook to b8 and win the pawn, but he doesn't have to. Knight to c4. We're just showing the best moves for both sides. King f3, getting the king to help the passed pawn. Knight a3, not much better. f5, here comes the pawn. Bishop d4, abandoning this pawn, trying to stop the pawn from coming down the board. Rook takes c7, knight takes b5, rook takes b7, knight d6, rook checks, king g8, rook d7, skewering the pieces, bishop e5, guarding it, f6. And the bishop can't take without losing the knight, but f7 check followed by rook checks is a threat. Okay, let's go through the game again. We have a little time for our video today. Let's go through the game again and see how Morphy won the game. All right, so e4, e5, f4, King's Gambit. Best thing to do is accept. Black does not accept. White plays knight f3, d6, c3. Important idea to learn. If you haven't played over a lot of Grandmaster games and you don't know this idea of playing c3 and d4 in a lot of double e-pawn games, so that if he ever captures the pawn, you can take back with a pawn and have a pawn on d4. This is an important idea to know. It's really probably more common than putting the knight on c3 in a lot of lines, especially if your opponent has a bishop on c5. So Morphy plays c3. Black plays bishop g4. Here, the computer suggests pawn takes pawn first. Morphy plays bishop e2, his most popular move, knight c6. Here, Stockfish suggests either d3 or bishop to b5. White plays b4, bishop b6, b5. Probably not the best move, b5. Stockfish suggests a4, b5, knight a5, d4, e takes d4, e takes d4. Oh, he took the knight first. Bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3. Now e takes d4, e takes d4. Queen f6, bishop f3. Knight hits the bishop. Morphy says, go take my pawn. Queen takes f4. Castles with a big advantage. And now black should play knight e7. Black makes the mistake and plays knight f6. And here Morphy could punish him with queen e3 hitting the knight, and when he saves the knight, you hit the other knight, and then you have all kinds of cute threats to either push the pawn or take things and get discoveries. So black's in big trouble. So queen e2 would win here. Morphy plays queen to d3, which looks nice but doesn't have quite the oomph. And Morphy, usually found those oomph moves, but not here. Knight a5. Knight c3, like Magnus Carlsen and all other best players in the world. They're better than everybody else, but they're not perfect. They're human. They make mistakes. And considering the year, 1858, Morphy's playing, a lot of best moves according to the computer. Okay, so knight c3, castles. g3, I think Stockfish wanted knight e2. Queen h6, king g2. Here come the rooks in the game, rook a e8, rook a e1. Now both sides can say, yeah, I pretty much have gotten all my pieces in the game, although this rook on f8 is not so good, and this knight is off sides. That's some of the reasons why white has full compensation for the pawn. Here Stockfish says black is just slightly better if both sides play perfectly. And the best move for black is queen to g6. Black plays king h8 first. giving Morphy time to hit the queen. He can hit it with knight e2. He can hit it with pushing the pawns. He can hit it with bishop e3. He decides to play bishop e3, queen g6, knight e2. Here black should play h5 with equality. He plays h6. Looks like it shouldn't make that much of a difference, but it does. And Morphy should consistently follow up with knight f4. Instead he plays bishop d2, which is given an exclamation point in the book, although Stockfish disagrees. And now black blunders with d5. White plays knight f4, queen h7, e5. Now, we didn't look at it in the game. Black counterattacked the bishop, and then the bishop hit the rook. Let's say black moves the knight right away. Where could he go? Let's say he plays knight to d7. Or, well, let's say he trades queens first. Let's say he trades queens, and then he plays knight to d7 to try to save everything. After bishop to b4, rook to g8, white can just play bishop d5, hitting everything and ending up ahead in material. So that's why black probably chose to bring this knight in first. But he still has problems with removal of the guard on this d5 pawn. So knight to c4. No, black traded queens first. Okay, queen takes d3, knight takes d3, then knight c4. Okay, so now there's removal of the guard here. White attacks the rook. Black comes in. Engine says, take off the knight. Morphy says, I'll take the exchange. Bishop takes, rook takes. And now the most active way to play is just simply play bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes with a fairly easy win. For some reason, Morphy decided to get cute here. Played knight to f4. Still winning. Black plays knight ed2. He has nothing better. Morphy plays his best move, giving back the exchange, but winning a whole bunch of pawns. Knight takes f1. Again, Morphy has to decide which way to take. He takes here. The knight only has one move. So bishop takes c4. The knight goes to d2. Hitting the bishop. Morphy goes here. And now Boden misses the threat. He's still, you know, if he had played g5 here, Morphy would play knight e2 guarding the d-pawn. Computer says f6, e6 with a big advantage to white, but still it's only about one pawn advantage, so it's still a game. Instead, black misses the idea, plays bishop d4, e6, that's the ball game. If pawn takes, knight checks. If now king here to guard the rook, then white will not take the rook. Instead, he'll play bishop checks. Now, the king can't go away from the rook because he'll lose the whole rook, so he has to put the rook in the way. And now white could play something like bishop d5, threatening rook checks, removing the guard again. And there's no defense. So, he's not just winning the exchange here, he's winning a whole rook. Alright, so knight G, so black didn't fall for that, but he's lost anyway. He plays, let's see, what did he play? He played g5 now, too late. Pawn up, rook here, bishop takes, g takes, Morphy takes back. Also bishop takes, rook wins. Rook takes e7, rook takes e7. And white's up in exchange. Black's king is caught in the corner. Black's queenside pawns are vulnerable. White has a pass pawn on the f-file. It all adds up to black resigning. Okay, so that was Morphy-Boden, 1858 in London. I assume Boden was a British player. You know, not a perfect game, but a good example of how people played in those days and how Morphy played, and you know, a good example of what you learn when you play over games. You don't usually learn that much from any one game. Sometimes you learn a little bit from a game, but it's playing over game after game after game after game and reading what the author has to say. You know, when I first started, I played over about 2,000 annotated master games, and after I read what the author had to say about 2,000 games, and if you think about that, that's 40 moves for each player, so he has 80 moves he can comment on times 2,000 games. That's a lot of opportunity. I mean, they didn't comment after every move like some books do, but even so, that's an awful lot of talk that you get to read from the authors explaining to you how to play chess. And once you read enough of that, a tremendous amount of that, you gain a tremendous amount. Every good player pretty much has either done that or these days maybe, got a chance to watch videos where good players are explaining things. But in any case, you want this tremendous amount of information coming in so that you can start to become familiar with what people are trying to do over and over again. Okay, for YouTube, this is Dan Heisman. Hopefully you enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye.